Hello and welcome to World War II Part 9. Italy enters the fray and the beginnings of the Battle of Britain. Now, what I want to do on this video, I've covered the major events of the fall of France. We're going to talk a little bit about Italy and talk about some of the preparation work for the coming Battle of Britain, German plans, Allied plans, etc. But first of all, what I want to do, is I want to just go through the main events of the campaign in France. One of the most outstandingly fast and destructive military performances seen in the Second World War so far. So let's just do a recap. Let's just go through the main events again, like I said, the Western Front opened at 5:35 a.m. German airborne troops landing on bridges at Rotterdam, Dordrecht in Holland, and more parachute drops on the fortress of Eben-Emael, which I talked about. The key to defence of the Liege in Belgium, and the German armies of Army Group B and A cross the frontiers of Belgium, Holland and Luxembourg, all at unison. Now at 7:30 a.m, advanced troops at French 7th Army and British Expeditionary Force into Belgium, according to the Dial plan, what I talked about, and it would be possible to contain any German attack by basing the defence on Belgium and pivoting with the right flank on Sedan and the Ardennes Plateau. But as I've already gone through, that is where the main German armoured attack and indeed the main focus of the German impetuousness was. So, however, the Dow plan, did not foresee that the Germans would attack across the Ardennes Plateau that I talked about, which was thought to be impassable, though just as such an attack was the key to von Manstein's Operation Sickle. Now, by attacking in force in Netherlands, the Germans drew the Allied armies off to the north, as I explained, and thus, when the German attack came at Sedan, the pivot between those armies was completely destroyed at a blow, and a huge salient was opened. Now, on May 11th, the Germans employed parachutists and airborne formations to take the Belgian fortress of Eben-Emael, which had been thought impregnable, and surrounded Liege. Heavy bombing raids are carried out on many Belgian towns, and 3 divisions of British Expeditionary Force take up defensive positions on the left bank of the River Dyle between Wavre and Louvain. Now, on May 11th, Churchill gives orders to authorise Bomber Command, RAF Bomber Command, to carry out bombing raids on Germany itself, and the British War Cabinet is formed on May 11th, following the previous day of May 10th, Neville Chamberlain's resigning from Cabinet and Winston Churchill forming a coalition government. So one of the first things Churchill does is authorises Bomber Command to attack Germany, and he forms his War Cabinet. Now, also on May 11th, President Roosevelt of the US tells King Leopold III of the dismay and indignation felt by the Americans at the German attack. Now, on 12th of May, the Belgians reinforced their positions on line of the Dial. The French 7th Army, which has entered the Netherlands, is ordered back to evacuate Breda and fall back on the Scheldt. French troops dig in on the left bank of the Meuse, the Meuse River that I mentioned, after abandoning the right bank to the Germans. This allowed the Germans to occupy Sedan and spearheads by Guderian's 1st and 10th Armoured Divisions. Further north, the 7th Armoured Division reaches the Meuse on a level with Dinant, and the Luftwaffe systematically bombs and destroys Allied lines of communication. Now, on 13th of May, Guderian's armoured divisions forced the crossing at Meuse on either side of Sedan. And in Belgium, the French 1st Army and Lord Gort's British divisions reached the bank of the Dyle. The British are now deployed between Louvain and Wavre, the French between Wavre and Namur. The Germans, meanwhile, take Liege. Now, already by May 13th, the Dutch army is collapsing, and the High Command orders a general retreat to defensive positions on what is called the Dutch Fortress, an area including Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht. Now, Queen Wilhelmina and her government, as I've already detailed, they headed for London. Now, Churchill declared to House Commons on May 13th, "I have nothing to offer but blood and toil and tears and sweat," that famous Churchill line. Now, it is on May 14th that Rotterdam is subjected to a savage air bombardment. At 4 p.m. on May 14th, French tanks, poised to stage a counter-attack against the German armoured formations in the area of the Meuse, are ordered to disperse over a front of 12 miles, which, to the compacted panzer formations is going to be no good. General Corrupt's 9th Army retires to Rocroi. Almost all day, wave after wave of Allied bombers numbering nearly 200, as I went through, attacked the German reinforcements streaming over the floating bridge thrown over the Meuse by Guderian in the area of Sedan, but with no effect. The German anti-aircraft destroy 85 aircraft, 35 from British, and the Germans, meanwhile, have opened a breach of 50 miles, okay, between Dinant and Sedan. And during afternoon, General Guderian brings almost all his tanks across the Meuse River. Rapid movement from Guderian. Now, on the 15th of May, okay, the Western Front, the Dutch capitulate, okay, to the Germans. The German 6th Army cuts off the retreat of General Korap's army, which is broken up and dispersed. The German 6th Army breaches the enemy lines between the Louvain and the Namur. You know, it is incredible the speed and efficiency of the German attack. Now, late in the evening on May 15th, it is reported that German tanks have reached Montcornet, okay, only about 12 miles from Laon. Okay, Gamelin at once informs Daladier, Minister of National Defence, who orders an immediate counterattack. I mean, Gamelin replies that he has no available reserves, and the French army is already close to collapse due to the enormous breach opened in their lines. And RAF, okay, following Churchill's issue of order to Bomber Command that they can attack German territory, the RAF first raids the Ruhr basin, the industrial basin in Germany. Now, the British government also decides to concentrate aircraft production on a limited number of types, obviously, namely some bombers, heavy bombers, medium bombers, and obviously Hurricanes and Spitfires. Now, on May 16th, okay, Gamelin refuses to take responsibility for the defence of Paris and orders a general retreat of French forces out of Belgium. Only 6 days into the German campaign, the French are now in withdrawal. The Dutch have surrendered. The Belgian forces are ordered to retreat on the Scheldt and Lord Gort's British divisions also retire from the region. Now, Rommel's 7th Armoured Division, okay, has penetrated 50 miles into French territory towards Cambrai, capturing 10,000 prisoners and 100 tanks. And towards the evening, Guderian's armoured divisions reach a point about 60 miles east of Sedan. Now, also on May 16th, okay, Churchill writes to Benito Mussolini, the Italian fascist dictator, writing to him to stress that he wished to avoid a conflict between Britain and Italy. But as we know, that would not happen. And as we know, the Italians would get a real kicking for it, especially in Abyssinia and Libya. It could well be, you know, that the threat of Allied Italian intervention in war could force more pressure on the British, especially the Royal Navy, due to Italy's rather large but relatively ineffective fleet. Now, Roosevelt, okay, US President, on May 16th asked Congress for $900 million to begin strengthening the US armed forces. Roosevelt is itching already to get into a fight, but he just hasn't had the reason yet that America can enter the war. There's a lot of people in America, in the Senate and in the Congress, who do not want a war, do not feel it's America's problem. Now, the French Premier, Reynard, tells Churchill by radio that the battle is lost and the road to Paris is already wide open to the Germans. On 17th of May, instead of continuing his advance on Paris, Guderian turns northwest, okay, heading to the coast. I mean, by midday, his advanced troops reach the River Oin, south of Guise, not far from St. Quentin. Now, the brave attacks of Colonel de Gaulle's 4th Armoured Division over 3 days north of Laon can do nothing to stop Guderian's armoured thrust, but they do earn General de Gaulle a promotion to General, as I said. Now, troops of General von Richelieu's 6th Army enter Brussels, okay, and Brussels is declared an open city, probably to save it from the treatment of Warsaw and Rotterdam. And Paris breathes a sigh of relief as the German army has turned direction and is no longer approaching the capital. On May 18th, okay, Guderian occupies St. Quentin and Rommel reaches Cambrai. Now, okay, General Girard and the remnants of the 9th Army, okay, formerly under General Korap, enter Le Cateau, a small town not far from Cambrai, and are captured by the Germans, who got there hours earlier. Also on May 18th, the Germans take Antwerp. Now, encouraged, okay, by the Germans' fantastic military campaign so far, Mussolini completely kind of turns tail on the comments of Churchill and Roosevelt, dismissing them. He's feeling that pull of the war and feeling that Italy can have its own conquests, which don't exactly go to plan in areas I mentioned, nor really in Albania or Greece, as we'll go through. In May 19th, okay, the 9 German armoured divisions which breached the French line between Sedan and Namur regroup between Cambrai and Peronne. Now, Rommel, okay, General Erwin Rommel, well, future General Erwin Rommel halted his attack on previous day to allow his troops to regroup, persuades General Hermann Hoth, his immediate superior, that his 7th Armoured Division is in a position to advance and occupy the dominating heights of Arras, about 12 miles west of Cambrai. Now on 20th of May, Rommel occupies indeed the heights around Arras. At 9 a.m, Guderian's 1st Armoured Division takes Amiens. At 7 p.m, the German 2nd Armoured Division occupies Abbeville, and at 8 p.m, one of Guderian's battalions reaches the channel at Noyelles. The German tanks have opened a breach in the Allied line 20 miles from east to west. Now, north of that gap is the French First Army, the 9 divisions at BEF, and the Belgium Army. Now, to the south, from west to east, are the French 10th, 7th, 6th, and 2nd Armies. Now, having reached the siege, the Germans have virtually surrounded nearly 50 Allied divisions, including the BEF, against the coast. The Fuhrer says the armistice will be signed, in Rithodes, where the armistice of November 11th, 1918 was signed, and that France will have to restore to Germany all territory they have took from her over the last 400 years. Now, on 21st of May, British armoured forces attacked the German salient on the Arras Heights, but after a favourable start, they're forced back to the start line. A similar effort is made by 2 divisions at French First Army in the direction of Cambrai, but they also are fallen back. The Belgian government, meanwhile, moves to Bruges, and General Admiral Erich von Raeder, Commander-in-Chief at Kriegsmarine, directs the Führer's attention to the need to plan for the invasion of Britain, which may still be necessary because the British government are not going along with any possible peace overtures. Now, in Britain on May 22nd, the Emergency Powers Defence Act is passed, giving the government full control over persons and property. On the Western Front, German forces at Noyelles now turn northwards, and the 2nd Armoured Division towards Boulogne, and the 1st in the direction of Calais. Wow, the Western Front is being carved up like a roast. Now, on 23rd of May, General von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief of Army Group A, orders his armoured formations to halt their advance. And on 24th of May, the 2nd Armoured Division of the Germans launches a violent attack, on Boulogne. The 10th attacks Calais. The 25th of May, the Germans take Boulogne. They now surround the Belgium Army, French forces, and most at BEF. The Allies fall back on Dunkirk, and the Belgian front that they are bravely trying to hold is breached in the Lys Valley. Now, on May 26th, the Belgium High Command tells the British and French that its army situation is critical. The Belgian government asked King Leopold to leave his country, as did the Queen of Holland and the Grand Duchess of Luxembourg, but King Leopold refuses. And during the night, Calais falls to the German 10th Armoured Division. Now, also on 26th of May, it's announced in London, that due to enemy occupation of Holland and parts of Belgium and northern France, children are to be evacuated from a number of towns on the east coast. They're obviously already anticipating German air attacks. On 27th of May, the evacuation, of the BEF, the British Expeditionary Force, codename Operation Dynamo, begins, and the RF provides massive support, flying over Channel, harrying the Germans. Roosevelt, meanwhile, on 27th of May, offers to mediate in talks between Italy, France and Britain in a bid to stop Mussolini entering the war, but Mussolini is already prepping for that fact to enter the war. At 5 p.m, King Leopold of Belgium sends an envoy to German headquarters offering to capitulate, and the Führer responds saying unconditional surrender. So on May 28th, King Leopold surrenders. Belgium gives in. The Belgian army has pretty much been wiped out anyway, but he surrenders unconditionally. Now, the French armies on May 28th fall back on all fronts. They just can't handle the speed and ferocity of German attack. And now around Dunkirk, there are some 350,000 troops waiting to be taken off, who've been trapped by the German pincer movement against the coast. So far, not even 18,000 soldiers have been withdrawn, and the town and the docks of Dunkirk are heavily bombed, while British craft that are able to have harbour have to face the fire of German batteries at Calais and submarine attacks from the North Sea. Now, the collapse of Belgium convinces Mussolini that Italy must enter the conflict as soon as possible, and by why heck does he have some reversers? In May 29th, okay, the Germans occupy Ypres, of course, that great bloody battleground of World War I, Ostend and Lille. And at Dunkirk, the evacuation continues under constant attacks by the Luftwaffe. Now, the German tanks were given a halt order, and Göring convinced Hitler that the Luftwaffe could finish the destruction of the army itself. And I think that halt order, stopped Hitler pretty much wiping out the British Army in Europe as a fighting force. If the Panzers would have gone in and pushed them to the coast and crushed that salient, the British would not have had an army in Europe to speak of, except for some reserve divisions in UK. So that was a major, kind of blunder there. Now, Hitler meets the commanders of his army groups at Cambrai, telling them he's decided to deploy the armoured force immediately for a southward offensive to settle accounts in France. Now, the 10 panzer divisions, are regrouped into 5 panzer corps, 3 of them under command of von Bock, commander of Army Group B, and 2 under von Rundstedt, who commands Army Group A. Now, von Bock, moves 3 armies, the 4th, 6th and 9th, to the Somme to take up positions beside Rundstedt's 2nd, 12th and 16 armies, already on the Aisne and the Ailette. Now, General Weygand, commander of the French forces, plans to counterattack, on the south side at Breach, opened by the German army divisions, where it happens that the bulk of French forces are concentrated. Now, to face the Panzer Corps, he deploys the 10th, 7th and 6th armies on the left, the 4th and 2nd armies in the centre, and the 3rd, 5th and 8th armies on the right. Now, by midnight, the greater part of BEF and almost half the French First Army are in sight of the Sea of Dunkirk. Now, 30th of May, the evacuation of Allied troops from Dunkirk continues, while British artillery tries to hold the advancing German troops at bay, with rapidly shrinking levels of ammunition. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, sinks 3 destroyers and damages 6 more, and many of the armada of ships transporting the Allied forces to Britain are actually sunk. Now, Mussolini on 30th of May declares that Italy will enter the war on June the 5th. Now, on 31st of May, 68,000 Allied troops are taken off the beaches at Dunkirk, but the Admiralty now decides to withdraw all modern destroyers from Dunkirk area. The Luftwaffe are inflicting too many losses. Now, General Lord Gort hands over command at British troops still in France to Major General Sir Harold Alexander, and he embarks for Dover, with General Alan Francis Brooke, commander of the 2nd Corps of the BEF. Now, Churchill arrives in Paris, to meet with various colleagues and discuss the war effort. Roosevelt, meanwhile, on 31st of May, makes yet another approach to Italian government, basically saying if Italy enters the war, the USA will be much more given to giving France and Britain aid. So, it is quite incredible. Now, 2nd of June, Operation Dynamo is concluded during the night when the last 4,000 British soldiers leave French soil. It is a remarkable manoeuvre, from destroyers to frigates, to sailboats, to pleasure liners, to rowboats, to wooden oar boats. I mean, every boat you can imagine took part in that to get our troops out of there, and it was a remarkable feat to pull out over 200,000 British troops and over 100,000 French troops at the end, which would then in Britain form the Free French armies. Now, the Germans on the 3rd of June strike a decisive blow against the perimeter at Dunkirk, and the French rearguard is driven back to within 2 miles of Dunkirk. Resistance clearly is not going to last much longer, and Paris on the 3rd of June is bombed by the Luftwaffe, signalling a decision later that they will actually declare Paris an open city to avoid it being smashed by the Luftwaffe. Now, at 3:40 a.m. on June 4th, the destroyer Shikari leaves Dunkirk, the last ship to evacuate French troops, and at dawn, German troops reach the Dunkirk beach. So the Germans now looking out on the sea around Dunkirk. And between early hours of the 4th of June and May 27th, when the operation began, that is just little more than a week, they have evacuated nearly 340,000 soldiers. It is incredible. But in course of that, some 200 ships were lost, including some of them on modern destroyers in British Navy, and nearly 200 aircraft lost, against only 140 losses of the Luftwaffe. But like I already broke down, the BEF and the French didn't only, leave a lot of the rifles and machine guns, left 2,000 artillery pieces, 60,000 trucks, 76,000 tons of ammunition, and 600,000 tons of fuel and supplies. So basically, they got the troops out, But, you know, when those troops get back to British soil, they are now under-equipped. They do not have artillery, they do not have trucks. The BEF is in a bad state and would take some time to re-equip. And with Germany, you know, already, you know, they're not denying the fact Germany may try and cross the channel. It's a very, very grave situation, and Britain is left practically unarmed. Now, at end of Dunkirk, there remains on British soil only 500 artillery pieces of all types, and some of them date back to World War I. Now, on 5th of June, okay, the last Battle of France begins. The Germans unleash a fierce aerial and artillery bombardment on the line of the Somme and the Aisne and on the lines of communication between the French armies deployed between Abbeville and the Maginot Line. Now, General Weygand issues an appeal to all his soldiers. Let the thought of our country's sufferings inspire you, you know, in the firm result. This kind of talk is very poetic, but it's not going to work at this point. The French army has been dissected. On 6th of June, General Hermann Hoth's 15th Panzer Corps breaks through on the lower Somme between Amiens and the coast in the sector of the French 10th Army. The French 7th Army, meanwhile, puts up very resolute resistance to Cleese, 2 armoured corps between Amiens and Péronne, and further east, okay, infantry of the German 9th Army succeed in breaking through the lines of the French 6th Army, but are driven back. Now, the French are forced to withdraw to the south bank of the Aisne. Guderian's panzer group, made up of 2 armoured corps, advances south east towards Chalons and Langres to reach the flank of the Maginot Line, and the French armies facing east. You know, France is dissected. 7th of June, the Germans occupy Nyon, Forges-les-Eaux, 40 miles south of the Rhône and about 25 miles from Rouen on the Seine. Nothing can stop their advance on Rouen now. You know, it is what it is. They are finished. Now, also on the Western Front, the Germans occupy Rouen, Dieppe, Compiègne, and now reach the Seine and the Marne. The Battle of the Somme becomes a French rout. The left wing at French 10th Army, left completely isolated, retires on St. Valley to occupy to attempt to withdraw by sea. Meanwhile, German troops cross the Marne. General Weygand warns Reynard that a complete collapse up front may come at any moment. The French army is already completely defeated virtually. So on 10th of June, the Germans cross the Seine as the French retire to the Loire in disorder. General Weygand admits that the front has been breached. The French government leaves Paris for Tours when information reaches them that Italy is about to declare war on France and Britain. And of course, okay, at 4:30 p.m. on the 10th of June, the Italian Foreign Minister Ciano receives the French ambassador at the Palazzo Chigi and informs him that Italy considers itself in a state of war with effect from tomorrow, the 11th of June. A similar declaration of war is sent by the Italian Foreign Minister to the British ambassador. So within hours of Italy's decision to enter the war, President Roosevelt strongly condemns the dictatorships and promises more help for the Western allies. And during the night, Italian aircraft take off from airfields in Sicily for the first raid of many on the island of Malta. Now, on 11th of June, the advance into central France by German armies continues. Reims now falls to the invading forces. And the situation at French army is now, you know, in a bad way. At 30 divisions that still exist on paper, 11 of them have lost half of their equipment and effectiveness. 13 of them are reduced to 25% of their equipment and effectiveness. The French army is basically ceasing to exist. Now, okay, first encounter in Africa, the Italian Air Force bombs Port Sudan and Aden, while the RAF carries out raids on targets in Eritrea, and the Italian Air Force carries out 8 more air raids on Malta. I will cover in the rest of this video, and then we'll cover the Battle Britain more in full on the next part 10. Okay, but we'll go through the Italian military preparations for war. So on 12th of June in morning, Guderian crosses the heights of Champagne and launches his armoured corps against Chalons de Marne, which falls without resistance. General Weygand orders a general retreat, and in French Council of Ministers held near Tours, Weygand, himself supported by Pétain, presses the need for an armistice, but the proposal is firmly dismissed by Paul Reynard. Now, the Inter-Allied Supreme War Council continues meeting at Brayer, and the first bombing raids by the RAF on Italy at Turin and Genoa are completed. So basically, the Western Front, the French 7th Army and the Paris Army retreat to the Loire. The Maginot Line is breached south of Saarbrücken by troops of Army Group C. Meanwhile, the German High Command issues new directives on the future Tacit troops in French territory, giving out new orders, new targets. Now, to the southwest towards Loire, an armoured corps will advance to cut off the retreat of French troops retiring on Bordeaux, while another armoured corps will move southeast toward Lyon and Dijon to enable the Italians to cross the Alpine passes and attack the French defenders in the flank. Now, finally, Guderian with his 2 armoured corps will turn east towards the Langres Plateau and the Swiss border to cut off the retreat of the French armies in the Maginot Line. And it's on this day, June 14th, that Paris is declared an open city in the hope the Luftwaffe will not bomb it. Now, Russia, on this day, Russia's been quiet since taking a bloody nose against the Finns, but on this day they deliver an ultimatum to the small Baltic nation of Lithuania that the Lithuanians have no alternative but to allow the Russians to occupy their country, and similar ultimatum on June 16th to Estonia and Latvia bring Russian occupation of these countries also. Now, that follows on from what I went through in the Winter War, where Russia was kind of enforcing deals on these countries for naval ports and air bases. But now Russia, with no pressure from Western allies being possible under collapse in the West, have basically wrote to them all saying, we are going to occupy you and there's nothing you can do about it. Meanwhile, Spanish troops, occupy the international zone of Tangier. Now, on 15th of June, the German war machine seems invincible. Reynard decides to sue for peace, but he's opposed by none other than General Weygand, who until now has supported an armistice. German troops take the legendary battleground from World War I of Verdun. So on June 16th, Dijon falls and Guderian's armoured corps are on the Saône and marching on Besancon. The Maginot Line is thus turned, while Army Group C crosses the Rhine at Colmar. So basically, on June 16th, they meet to discuss their surrender. The Anglo-Egyptians meet to discuss France's surrender. On 17th of June, Guderian's tanks are, near the Swiss border. And at midday, the French Premier Marshal Pétain broadcast at nation to basically inform them that negotiations are in progress for an armistice. I'll have a quick drink. My mouth's going dry. That's why I'm getting a bit story. So France effectively collapses, and on June 21st, Hitler receives the French dignitaries at Rethons in the same railway coach in which the German surrender was signed at the end of the First World War. General Keitel reads the dossier accusing the French of deceit and aggression. The French are then given the text of the armistice terms and no discussion is permitted. They do try to say, well, can we negotiate this? And the Germans say, no, you cannot. All the French are allowed to do is ask for clarification on any of the points. The Germans, meanwhile, impose bitter anti-revenge for the Treaty of Versailles. Now, General Hunziker obtains permission to speak to General Weygand. Weygand is told, at severe conditions dictated by the Germans, 3/5 of French territory will now be under occupation of the Germans. Prisoners of war will not be released. The costs of occupation will be assessed by the Germans, in which they will deem what reparations France has to pay Germany for the war, obviously a revenge hit for 1918. And the French army will be reduced to 100,000 men, again, just like Germany got inflicted with in 1918. Now, on June 22nd, 6:30 p.m, General Hunziker, head of French delegation, and General Keitel sign the armistice. 3 whole French armies fighting near the Swiss border immediately surrender. And units of the Italian First Army occupy Menton. So de Gaulle, on June 23rd, broadcasting from London, proposes the formation of a French National Committee. So basically, the Western Front is over. The Germans have launched a lightning campaign. The French have lost 92,000 wounded, 92,000 killed, 250,000 wounded, 1.5 million prisoners taken. The British in killed and wounded have lost 17,500, the Belgians 24,000, and the Dutch 10,000. German losses, meanwhile, in killed and wounded, 138,000, which seems a lot, but is very small. Now, as part of the collapse of France, what I just wanted to re-go over, because those two videos I did were very detailed. Italy, meanwhile, during this time was, as we've seen there, they declare war on the Western Allies, and they'd drawn up an entire war readiness plan, okay? Now, once again, in the West, the Italian directive was defence on Western Alps, okay, and no initiative. Just keep an eye out. The initiative to be taken only in event of a total French collapse under German attack, which indeed happened. Now, Italy also stated that in Yugoslavia they were going to remain vigilant, but more on the defensive. And on Libya, okay, defensive on the Egyptian and Tunisian fronts. The idea of offensive against Egypt must be set aside since the constitution of the Weygand army. In the Aegean, they were going to go on the defensive, while in Abyssinia, okay, Abyssinia in Africa, Italy deemed that it should go on the offensive, okay, to shield Eritrea and operations against Gedaref and Kassala in the Sudan. So defensive and possible counter-offensives on the Kenyan front. In the air, okay, offensive or defensive according to different fronts and enemy initiative. And at sea, general offensives in the Mediterranean and beyond. But one thing about Italy, okay, Italy entered the war with 73 divisions. Now, one interesting thing about those divisions is only 19 of them were complete. Okay, with 100% of their equipment. 34 were at a low state of efficiency, okay, only 50% of the vehicles and equipment, and 20 were even lower than that. Now, the Italian Air Force, okay, comprised a large number of planes, many of them obsolete design. They had some modern kind of medium bombers. The real strength of the Italian army, though, was in the navy. They had quite a modern navy in some ways. You know, in June 1940, the Italian navy consisted of 2 modern battleships, 19 modern cruisers, 126 destroyers, and 117 submarines. 4 other battleships were completing their final trials before joining the fleet, but they did have issues. You know, they had limited reserves of fuel for these ships, and they just had a limited, setup altogether, and they were not war experienced, battle experienced. To give you an idea, you know, French infantry divisions, you know, when we think about the new scale of the war and the tanks that are used, you know, armoured formations, the Italian infantry division had only 8 anti-tank guns per division. So if a line of Italian infantry divisions were facing off against an armoured formation, they had only 8 anti-tank guns per infantry division. You know, a French division had 52. You know, a German division had 75 anti-tank weapons. So German infantry divisions facing off against, Allied tanks had more than enough firepower to be able to deal with tank columns approaching them. But the Italian divisions were so woefully unequipped. Now, Italy did actually as well try to launch, but they did try to launch a bit of an offensive, okay, in southern France. Now, one thing about Italy is, as part of the German agreement, there were some conditions: immediate demobilization of French army, immediate surrender of all the army's weapons, of all warships and of all aircraft, an occupation of all French territory between the Alps and the Rhone, with bridgeheads on the right bank of the Rhone at Lyon, Valence and Avignon, and the occupation of Corsica. Now, the occupation of Tunisia and of French Somaliland, occupation at naval bases at Algiers, Mers el Kabir, which we will go to, and Casablanca and Beirut to become a neutral port, and Italy to have the right to occupy Beirut. Now, Italy were given the right under this peace deal to have the right to occupy any part of metropolitan France or her empire considered necessary for the conduct of operations, the maintenance of peace, or the establishment of order. Number 6 was France to be forbidden to make any demolitions or to evacuate any railway material from the zone marked down for Italian occupation, and denunciation of the Franco-British alliance, removing all British forces in metropolitan France and her remaining territories. And the final one was disarmament and disbandment of all Polish, Belgium and other foreign forces in France. Now, this, of course, would lead, okay, to Mers el Kabir, which we will talk about, where, you know, the Royal Navy took it upon themselves, to basically deal with the French Navy, amongst other things. So, That is Italy's makeup in the war. Now, Italy had a number of territories, okay, in Africa. They had a presence in Albania. They would move to make a presence in Greece. But actually, the Italian army was woefully under-equipped, was not really a fighting force to really compare. But they did try an attack, okay? They did try an attack in the south of France, okay? Now, the Prince's forces for the attack on France in the area of Mont Blanc, okay, with the 4th Army, they'd attack with the Alpini Corps and the 1st and 4th Corps, which comprised 3 Alpini mountain detachments and 9 infantry divisions, and Monteviso Ventimiglia, okay, of the 1st Army would attack with the 2nd, 3rd and 15th Corps comprising 13 infantry divisions. Now, they had also 2,949 artillery pieces, and they were quite a large fighting force, but their effectiveness, wasn't that great. Now, across the Alps, okay, General Auray found his forces reduced at bare minimum with which to meet the Italian attack. Now, on the French left flank, okay, was General Baynett's 14th Corps facing the Italian 4th Army, with its 66th and 64th Divisions and the fortified sector in Savoy and Dauphine. Now, on the right flank was General Montsagne's 15th Corps, consisting of General St. Julian's 65th Division, blah, blah, blah. So basically, it left 185,000 French troops meeting the attack of the Italians near 500,000 strong. Now, on the northern sector, okay, between Mont Blanc and the Col de l'Arche, the terrain favoured the French. Okay, further in south, the Franco-Italian frontier veered away from mountain peaks in favour of the Italians. But the French had countered this disadvantage by building fortifications, and on night of June 10th, 11th, General Auray made play with demolition network and had acquired another advantage for his defending troops. Now, the Italians failed all along the front. The Prince of Piedmont, okay, opened his offensive in bad weather, which is never a good thing, in the Maritime Alps sector on June 20th. It was extended to the whole front of Italy and France on the following day, and by the time the armistice, okay, on 25th, the Italians had managed to advance as far as the French defences in a few places. But despite Mussolini's bombastic claims, Italian troops had managed to break through none of the French defences. And at Little St Bernard, the Alpini Corps pushed down the first few bends in the road, leading to Bourges St Maurice, but could not take the ruined redoubt, which formed part of the French advanced position. In the Maurienne Valley, the Italian First Corps, scaling the lower passes with a splendid sporting bravado, did manage to get a few battalions into the Arc Valley and to occupy the villages of Termignon and Lans-le-Bourg. But the 2 French 75mm guns in the Tourret emplacement prevented the Italians from using the road. And Ciano noted that Italian positions would have become impossible if the armistice had not intervened and allowed them to be supplied. So basically, the French artillery scored victories, 101 shells fired by 4 280mm mortars kept ready for the tanks, smashed 6 at 8 Italian 149mm guns at the fort of Charberton. Just ridiculous military failure. In the Maritime Alps, the Italian First Army had pushed a mile or two into advanced positions at French 15th Corps and had overrun 2/3 of Menton. So basically, this entire attack went from bad to worse. Now, the French during these sets of battles between the French and Italians lost 37 killed, 42 wounded and 150 missing, which is only 79 killed and wounded. The Italians suffered 631 killed, 2,500 wounded, and had 616 prisoners taken. So, less than 300 French casualties and over 3,000 Italian casualties, and that kind of sums up exactly what was going to go on here. Now, in preparation for my next part, okay, there is something else I want to talk about. And, that is the planned invasion of Britain by Germany. Now, Germany, okay, had already started drawing up plans for an attack on Britain, okay. And this plan involved, okay, phase 1. Air attacks on shipping and coastal ports, okay. German fighter tactics, proving superior. The second phase of attack were going to be attacks on radar stations and forward fighter bases following the conclusion of phase 1. The climax of the phase occurred by August 15th, so they're to have achieved the goals by then. Third phase is the attacks on air production and inland fighter bases. And they did have an entire plan, okay, to land infantry divisions in UK soil. But the problem was with Operation Sea Lion that really they could never get off the ground. The RAF would hold them off. That will be the focus, of my next video. We will go through the Battle of Britain in more entirety, and we will talk about the plans that Germany had, indeed, to land on British soil, to land on the south coast where their landing ports were, the divisions that had been involved, and of course the Battle of Britain. So Italy has now entered the war. We will cover Mersa al-Kabir. We will be covering Matewan. We will cover a whole number of incidents, including the Italian invasion of Albania and Greece. The next major focus of the war I will cover, of course, will be the Great Patriotic War. Until then, we shall start going through the war while we approach the greatest invasion of history in June 1941. So there is part 9. I did put Battle of Britain on there. I haven't really gone into it, but we will go through the Battle of Britain. That basically Hitler issued a decree on 16th of July that since Britain shows no willingness to surrender, he orders preparations for Operation Sea Lion, which his immediate objective is to land 20 divisions on the south coast of England. The operation will not be launched unless the Luftwaffe has annihilated the RAF and won air superiority. Hitler and his generals know if the RAF is still a fighting formation, landing German troops on the South British coast would be suicide. The RAF close to their bases, would cause absolute carnage. So in the next part, we will go through into the Battle of Britain and cover it in more detail. We'll also cover Mussolini's further bumblings and ramblings and failures in part 10, hitting double figures. I'm out for now.